Hello and welcome to Yagorath, the Making of the Maw, another one of our panels in the Hi-Rez Showcase series. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be talking a little bit about the next upcoming champion, Yagorath, Giant Worm Mama. So you want to be a worm. As we get started, we're going to go ahead and start with introductions so we know who's who's talking, all that good stuff. My name is Kevin Reedon. I'm one of the game designers on Paladins. I go by Nico. And Yagorath is my worm child. Very excited to talk about her with you guys today.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brett. I'm part of the animation team. I've been working on Paladins almost 4 years now, and myself, as well as the rest of the animators, were helped bring Yagorath to life.
Hi, I'm Thunderbrush, art director on Paladins, and Yagorath is my big monster worm bae. Hope you like it.
Hi, I'm Myron. I'm one of the programmers on Paladins, and I help bring Yago to life.
Awesome. So as we get started, kind of a brief window into the worm. This champion is one of our most ambitious additions to the realm ever. We tried to develop her kind of with that in mind, both from the art side and the technical side, knowing that there are going to be exceptions to rules and knowing that she may very well not be everyone's can of worms, so to speak. But hopefully we are able to maintain what makes her special and fit her into naturally the roster of Paladins as a whole. Starting off with kind of an early concept phase, I think the best person to speak on this would probably be Rafe, if you want to kick us off.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So when we started working on Yagorath early on, believe it or not, it actually started with the champion Avora. And one of Avora's kind of early design features we knew we wanted was wanted this kind of mix of a monstrous, villainous character. So one of Vora's early concepts that I've actually shared previously, you'll see it on the right here in the presentation. She was very kind of biomechanical, very organic looking, kind of mutated really, and it was a really cool look. But it did have a hard time kind of gelling into the world of Paladins and kind of the aesthetic we sort of established. And it was always a bit of a fight between the villainous character and the monstrous elements, and the monstrous elements kept kind of overriding her as a character. So after going through quite a few concept iterations, we kind of realized the best path forward was to actually kind of split them down the middle and let Vora be her own character and be stronger for it, and give us a platform to actually go all in on the actual monster design. And once that happened, the team that was already excited for Vora as a really cool character template, both of those things just became better. Like Vora really found her own voice, and Yagorath we knew would be one of the craziest champions we've ever put into Paladins. I mean, immediately, we started out, we were like, it's not a bipedal character. It's a giant worm. She does this, and this is her jam. We knew we wanted her to be this sort of the source of the maw, like this entity, right? This other sort of force in the realm that's like one of the most terrifying things we've ever kind of put in it. But something that also felt like it was a strong addition to what Paladins is. And the excitement we hit was awesome.
I know Thunderbrush. Some of what was really cool is people were seeing kind of the teasers for Vora and what she may look like, and they were saying, "Oh, I kind of wanted a monster. I kind of wanted something that's not humanoid instead of what Vora ended up being." And so I was very excited to be able to see what you guys were whipping up conceptually for, as we mentioned, kind of that next monstrous, fulfilling that desire from the community.
Oh yeah, we had been teasing it all the way back since the Atlas stuff. That's how long Vora's kind of really was in the oven alongside Yagorath, where we knew we wanted to do something. We hadn't quite figured it out yet at the time, but obviously we got it all worked out, and what you see before you is something that, as a team, I think we're all incredibly proud of. It's the culmination of a lot of creative effort from design and art, and just everyone really gave a strong vote of confidence early on to kind of make it happen, because even though it may not appear so, she's easily one of our most ambitious champions I think we've ever tackled.
Yeah, I mean, would you say similarly, Brett or Myron, you guys kind of, were able to join the rest of the team. I think I'd safe to say the whole team was super, super excited super early on for something like this. Just not only the challenges that we were able to potentially tackle, but also just like how cool it could be.
Yeah, I mean for the animation team, as Thunderbrush said, like we were super excited for Vora, and we've been waiting for her for I think around a year. And yeah, like every iteration of Vora that we saw, we were heavily invested in, and super excited for, and we were really loving this monstrous aspect of it. It was something we haven't really gone to animate in Paladins yet. And then when they split into two different characters, like yeah, we had Vora, and Vora, everyone knows how she came out. It's so incredibly fun and awesome. But now we also have the worm, and I think when Thunderbrush initially came to the animation team and pitched, were like, "Hey, what if we just kind of make this giant monster? What do you guys think about that?" I don't think there was any hesitation between the team. It was just like, "Yep, yeah, we're in. Do whatever you need. We want to do it."
Yeah, it was awesome.
How about you, Myron? Did they come to you and say like, "Hey, we're gonna do this," and you're like, "All right," or were you a little hesitant about it?
It was actually funny because I wasn't the initial programmer assigned to the champion, and then I got thrown onto it, and I was like, "Oh, okay." Everyone was hyping up about how different she was and how crazy she was going to be. Like a lot of new tech needed to be added for her to make her work and things like that. But yeah, it was super exciting. Hearing about it, I was all on board. It's always fun to work on new things and implement new tech to make the worm work.
I think
And part of what's
back.
oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Go
I
ahead.
was back in the office before work from home. The animation team has a big whiteboard where we kind of keep our production stuff and make sure we keep track of everything that is on our plate. And I think I'm sure it's going to be hard to erase because it's been up there for so long, but we just had Worm Mama across the top of our whiteboard for a very long time. So yeah, we've been really excited about her.
The same thing we planned for every day, Pinky. Worm Mama.
Always worm.
It's Worm Mama. If we move on to the next slide, we'll kind of show like some of what's cool about the early iterations. You saw a little bit of the early concepts for Vor that ended up splitting into Yagorath with the last slide. Here, we have the very basic part of the process is being able to come to different teams and say, hey, this is maybe the general idea of what we want. Could this work? And we'll draw up it's absolutely fantastic. Our artists can draw up really quickly just mock-ups of what it may look like, or if we're exploring different presentations that we'll talk about a little bit later. On the right, you see kind of that first person. Poor Victor always gets victimized. That first person presentation, that kind of thing. Was there anything notable, would you say, about this concept phase for you guys? Or was it kind of par for the course until we got into the juicy bits?
One thing I would add is we go through a ton of iteration on every champion. That's just always a healthy process. We have to find the fun. Yagorath had one kind of rare exception, oddly enough. Again, we iterated some things, to be fair. We landed on a lot of her kit that kind of made it to the final version of her in this kind of initial kickoff meeting where we have design, prog, art kind of all together in a room, kind of brainstorming the ideas. Because early on, one of the first pitches I put in the concept actually was we wanted Yagorath to be enormous, and I'm always joking with Kevin that I want to make champions increasingly larger and larger, much to everyone's concern and worry. And I felt that with Yagorath, well, if we're cutting part of her off, then she can be enormous. So it's like she's coming out of the ground. And as fun as an idea that was, and we were going to have this travel form where she could kind of like swim through the ground like a shark, we realized, very quickly, we have thin platforms in some of our levels, and our level design just really wouldn't hold up to that kind of scrutiny. And we didn't have a good tech solve for it. But in this kickoff meeting, which again, this is kind of the power of collaboration, I cannot for the life of me remember who suggested it, but I just remember the moment it went out there, we all went nuts for it, of just having her sit above ground, curled up almost like a snake. And when she went to move, she would just curl up in a ball and roll. And then she would just become this kind of death wheel rolling throughout the map. And it was just, I think almost immediately we're like, well, that's it. Clearly that's what we do. And that concept on the left was actually, I think, done real time in that meeting while I was talking with everyone in the room. Cleaned up a little afterwards, but that's basically what we landed on. And I'd say the concept you see on the right side of the screen for the 1P presentation, animation absolutely killed it. Everyone really came together to make it happen. I championed pretty hard for the in-mouth view. I had to do a lot of convincing of people on the team. We're not the very first game in all of existence to do this view. It's kind of an old school FPS approach to playing as a monster. I'm biased to that kind of thing, and I wanted to have it in our game in particular. And thankfully, it came through. And it's kind of crazy actually how close the final product I think landed to this initial concept pitch. And there's just something about looking through the inside of the mouth as playing as a monster makes you feel more like that monster, even though her eyeballs are not actually in her mouth.
Yeah, I mean, you thought Rom was big, and now we see this, this champion tower over the battlefield. And I think, to your point, it's actually really interesting to bring, to kind of bring up the idea of, I'm going to use the term like gamifying, but the idea of she doesn't have eyeballs in her mouth. She isn't actually literally looking out of her mouth. But I think it adds a huge amount to the feeling in the presentation for her when you're playing as her. That just goes well beyond that distinction, right? So we can distinguish between like, oh yeah, okay, in real life or whatever, she would have eyes on her head, but in game, I think it definitely adds a lot.
Yeah, for sure. It just something about seeing those teeth on screen makes you feel like more. I mean, she's a creature, right? She's an animal. It feels scarier in a way because that's kind of one of the early player fantasies we really honed in on that everyone got really excited about. Vora is scary in her own way. She's this awesome, just villainous that just she wants to crush the realm, but she kind of attacks in this beautiful, graceful manner that makes her like this deadly, lethal, scythe master. Really, that's such a literal interpretation. But with Yagorath, we wanted a strong contrast there. Like she is clearly an other. She is something else entirely. So you get a gameplay experience with her that is wholly unique, and I think that was really fundamental in her core design early on from all the early concept pitches and everything we had going on. We knew we needed to kind of level up the experience in a way that was a bit unusual.
And
Yeah,
if we move on to the next slide here, we'll actually be able to see. Sorry, go ahead. But we'll be able to see some of the concept art as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was just gonna say, like, I think the closest thing we had to something like a presentation for being a creature is like Amani's dragon, which is still more of a pseudo 3P camera flying behind the head of the dragon. And yeah, we could have gone that solution for Yagorath, but I'm so glad we had this epiphany of just going all in on being monstrous and feeling like an absolute terror, and it definitely paid off in the end.
I think we really needed to, and I think we hit that. I think we really needed to play to her strengths, and part of her strengths is that otherworldly, towering over the enemies, viscerally monstrous feeling, right? And it wasn't actually for me until we got some of the sounds in and some of the VFX in. Shout out to Rollin again for some of our attacks, right? So we had placeholder stuff for some of the attacks. Or for some of the abilities, and then when we got that sound and effects in, I was super excited because it was that's how it's supposed to feel. I feel like I'm spoiler alert, you get to spray acid. I feel like I'm spraying acid all over the place and they're melting my enemies quite literally, and it was quite a good feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with Kevin. As soon as the sounds and the VFX came together, mainly for the ult for me, that's when I felt it. I was like, oh man, you're literally just chomping down on a person and just gulping them.
Yeah, so much good stuff.
Kind of speaking to that creation process, we can even, if we want, Brett, go into kind of some of the animation process as it comes to making such a unique champion, some of the difficulties associated with it.
Yeah, I mean, as Rafe said earlier, we had to. There were the early pitches of possibly having her be out of the ground. Like we knew we were gonna have a travel form, that was for certain, but we just didn't know how to go about the travel form. Let's start here. We didn't know if we wanted to do in-ground or how to go about it, and then once the in-ground kind of idea got scrapped because of like some thin platforms, and we weren't really sure how to go about that. Like I think even like in Vora, we had like an idea of going in the ground and had to scrap it for similar reasons. But yeah, that kind of came into okay, how do we keep her above ground the whole time while still being massive? And there were some early kit designs too that required her lower planted base that of where she was contacting the ground to be relatively steady. So that was a challenge that animation really needed to figure out, where it's like, okay, well, how do we make this towering raid boss of a monster and make sure that certain elements of her more so, like if in the picture on the right here, the donut effect we're getting on the bottom of her tail, which is more or less half of her body. Like the initial rig we're given from modeling is her just completely straightened in a very noodle-like presentation. So we then have to curl her into her shape. Jacob was the point on 3P for her, and he ended up doing this idle position. But yeah, we had these restrictions where we had to keep parts of her very steady while also still being able to do the rest of her kit and completely do every action that most characters needed to. And then the 1P was also its own challenge, where it's really not a traditional presentation. There's no gun, there's no arms. I mean, the majority of first-person presentations are as if you're looking through the eyes of the character, and we didn't really have that option. We could have gone like a solution like Amani's Dragon, where we had a pseudo 3P and maybe you just followed behind the head of the monster, but that wouldn't really do a great job selling it. Caitlin was the animator in charge of 1P, and she absolutely knocked it out of the park. It was amazing how quickly it came together, and it's also it's a very risky maneuver, because normally decisions like that are made way ahead before animation even starts, but doing a design like this, knowing we were going to go inside the mouth of Yagorath, that's a commitment that requires a lot of investment from different departments. And it's like, if we get to the point where it's modeled, we set it up tech-wise, we animate it, and then it doesn't work, that's a lot to go back on. So we really it's a big gamble and a big risk to even just attempt it and see how it feels. And it worked so well. Like the picture on the bottom left here is actually like the way the 1P rig is set up, where normally we have a camera right in the center and we have like the gun sitting right off to the side in front of it and maybe some arms around, and we kind of worked the camera to fake some effects as if you were looking through the eyes. And in her 1P rig, we did have the arms and we had everything available, but we also needed this mesh of the inside of her mouth, which was custom made specifically for 1P to look like you were inside the mesh, or inside the mouth. And like, as you can see in that picture, that mesh is really far forward from the camera. So it's like, it's not even our typical design, where we had to do some theatrics to just make it even feel like the camera was sitting right on top of the tongue, and it's not even there. So for how quickly her 1P animations came together, for how much of like a unconventional method this was, it was amazing how awesome it worked. Caitlin did some really gross in a good way, like in the GIF,
Oh, yeah.
like her.
The tongue is so sweet.
The like
I would-
quill sacks and the tongue, like it. She really did a great job making it feel like you were just this monster. Roland did a great work with like slime and drool and just the acid, and like you just truly feel like you are a monster even though you're not looking through the eyes of a monster. This is really one of the best presentation solutions we could have come up with. But yeah, it was a real big challenge, and like I said, it's a gamble to even attempt this, because if it didn't work, we'd be in real trouble. And it worked so well.
Yeah, definitely. One of
And
the
then-
I
challenges
would
to
say
1P also is
this gif of the mouth, right, is disgusting, but I love it. It makes me uncomfortable, but it's so good. And as you mentioned, it's not present in this animation gif, but we have a little bit of slime and drool dripping down, and it's like, it's it's awesome.
Like one of the big
we had
challenges.
a lot of we had a
Go
lot
ahead,
of feedback
Thunderbird.
about that internally on the team. That was hysterical as Caitlin was working on it. My feedback was always, it can't be gross enough. Keep going. A lot of people on the team were pretty consistently like, I'm not sure about this, and it's like, it'll be fine. Don't worry. It'll be fine.
More.
I think like the first day the drool got put in, everyone saw it and was like, "This is gross. I love it." let's keep doing
Yep.
this. But
Thanks,
yeah,
I
like
hate it.
the like first person being inside a mouth is so weird because it's like we still have to do reloads, we still have to do fires, we still have to do abilities. How do we do that with being inside the gums and teeth of a monster? And the solutions Caitlin came up with and the rest of the team came up with are absolutely outstanding. It's so fun to just roll around as Yagorath and deploy and then just like vomit acid on someone and just absolutely obliterate them. But if we go to the next slide, the other biggest challenge was the travel form, which we knew early on what was going to be. And like this is another thing that's like a big gamble early on. That's not how early animation typically gets involved, but like because we knew we had to ball her up, we had to have like the model and her initial design work with being balled up and so that's like something where we're constantly talking to modeling and rigging about is like how do we get this giant worm wrapped up in like a donut wheel. And like so her tail had to be modeled in a way that like we didn't really have intersecting parts or things that kind of got in each other's way. And I think also, Kevin, you might know that I think the timing on getting in and out of the travel form was also very short. So we had to have this massive worm quickly get in and out of this wheel form, which is very
Yes.
like unorthodox, and so we had to find a way to make it work. And so on the right there's two gifs of like what her just the idle being in the travel form is her balled up and kind of just throwing her tail over her head and curling up. And in the bottom one you can see like the rig and all the controllers we have to work with, which is quite a lot to have to manipulate and maneuver just to get in this ball form. It's something we definitely haven't had to tackle before, and it was a big challenge. And Jacob was in charge of this section, and he did outstanding. He worked a lot with Kyle and programming to get this form in a way that felt fun to. I think like the first few playtests, it was more fun to roll around as Yagorath and just try and run people over than to actually deploy and play as Yagorath. But like we had to figure out, okay, how do we handle the camera in this? How do we handle just the animations? Like what's too much? What's too little? Like I think in this animation, like yeah, you can see there's a breathing loop and she like pulsates, and there's like a gross aspect of it that makes her monstrous, but it's still enough to be there that makes her feel like she's still alive and breathing, but not enough to make it feel weird when she starts rolling. In the bottom left, we were messing around with some like FOV changes as she moved, and our tech artist Kyle captured this for us of like the first time we set it up and it wasn't exactly hooked up right, and she just kind of warp speeded. And I think that made it into playtest a few times, which was a definitely fun and nauseating moment.
She went
But
straight to
She's
plaid.
light speed. Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, the travel form was like the other biggest challenge of like we kind of had to set the blueprint early and really hope that everything worked well, and for the most part it did. Everything fell into place really early on, and allowed us to just focus more on polishing.
I'm always very
Yeah,
thankful that you guys are so willing to work with me because from my end, we tested different timings on the movement form swap, and it just didn't work when it was too long. It was you got stuck. You had we want to get in and out, especially when in planted form you can't move at all. So when I said like, hey, it needs to be as short as possible, you guys were like, all right, let's do it, kind of thing. So I greatly appreciated that.
And like another challenge is like in case there is like ever a change in speed or a ramp up in speed, like these animations for any type of movement, even if it's just like walking and running, they're done as like a treadmill effect where they're done in place and we set it to match a certain speed. So it's not like the character's actually moving in the animation files. And so we kind of have to line that up so it doesn't look like they're sliding. And normally it's easier to hide on like footprints and stuff, but as a giant wheel, it's definitely trickier to get lined up to certain speeds. And you guys absolutely figured it out with like just balling up and then immediately feeling like you're the slow, like lumbering big wheels start to ramp up the speed and eventually just reach this. I love hearing
I know
people
you.
like. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I know you mentioned like in the initial playtest her feeling so good to run around, and that's because she was speedy ball, running around in there. I went through multiple, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I went through multiple iterations with the like different movement speed curves, and how quickly she accelerates out of movement speed, or out of planted form into movement. Like you don't want her to get stuck there, because if you want to move quickly, you need to be fast enough, but you don't want it to just be like, all right, suddenly I'm at full speed, because that feels unnatural. So yeah, trying to find that right place was difficult but rewarding, especially in conjunction with the work that you guys were doing on animation at that point.
And like one of my favorite moments in playtest is still like hearing people shriek as a big wheel comes around the corner and just rushes at them. And it just scares.
No audio.
Yeah, yeah, stealth.
That's a silent. Yeah.
Yeah, Yagorath was definitely the silent flank early on when she had no audio, and she'd just roll around quietly like an electric car and just sneak up behind you and start ganking you. And it was a lot of fun.
She's electric.
You were confident on that point till that wheel came around the corner.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think early on in iterations, like Yagorath could just like rush you and then deploy into her planted form, and before you had time to react or get out of there, it was just a mess of acid and you were probably low health. And she really was the best flank in the game while she had no audio.
Just super fast. It just rolled around. One funny bug we found out early on in the playtest, due to the size, is that you could get stuck on certain maps. You couldn't even leave the opening gates, because you would just get stuck. So that was a solution we had to figure out, how to separate her collision boxes into two forms so she could actually maneuver in travel form, and then plant safely.
Like I think you guys ended up doing like a specific scale just for her travel form, right? So she could get through areas like that.
Yep. Yeah, she has like a specific size we use for her travel form, and then a different one when she's planted.
Yeah, big shout outs to Kyle, our tech artist, that helps us hook all these up and test everything. And it's awesome whenever we get gifts like the bottom left one back of like first looks at things and whether they work or don't work. It's always awesome to see.
We have to go
Kyle
faster.
is our team wizard. That I mean, he holds so much of the pipeline together. It's hard to even articulate how much he actually contributes. It is massive.
Yeah, definitely, and especially with how much of a challenge and different this character is from our normal conventional champions. Like it requires a lot of experimentation, and he's just always so willing and quick to get everything set up, and that was huge getting this character together and working early. But
kind of speaking to the idea of experimentation, I think that even harkens back to the idea that this champion is, for a lot of things, the champion of exceptions, right? So we had the two forms, how we're going to make that work animation wise or collisions wise. She's the largest champion. Like, sorry Rom, take a seat. Now we have the worm.
And I promised Kevin that Rom would be our tallest too, and then I immediately
I swear it's the last one.
It's the last one.
I don't know if we can go any larger than Yagorath at this point, but yeah, I mean, even some of the abilities, right? So we'll talk a little bit about this a little bit later, but she even has natural CC resistance, especially in planted form. So even making sure that there's a special effect group that we can apply that says, hey, don't let Yagorath get hit by Begone and carried away, for instance, because then you just have a flying worm in the air or something like that. So just the idea of all these exceptions, I think it turned out really, really, really well for the number of exceptions and the challenges that we had to face, especially on animation side. I think it really did come together.
Yeah, because normally
Mhm.
whenever we like take our first like few weeks on a new champion, we have like a list of just baseline animations that we have to fill out a champion with that include status effects, movements, like do they get lifted by Genos, do they get pulled by Makoa, just a bunch of different animations that normally every single character has, and she was definitely a special case where I know Jacob and the other animators went back and forth with you guys a lot on like, okay, well, is this animation needed? What do we want to do about this kind of situation? What about in travel form? Things like that. And so there are a lot of special niche cases with Yagorath that had to be figured out, and whether or not we had to make animations for them, and it was definitely was not a normal champion situation.
And
Mhm.
speaking of exceptions, and oh, sorry, Rafe, go ahead. I mean, Thunderbrush.
Oh, I was really just listening with you guys. Didn't have a whole lot to contribute other than everyone really came together and did a really awesome job. I think the biggest part to making this champion work, we keep talking about it, so I know I'm just being repetitious. The iteration and the back and forth, the willingness of design to let art play, and as well as coming back with great feedback, right? Because at the end of the day, we always want the character to be fun. Sometimes you have to explore for a while to really find the fun. And with
Mhm.
Yagorath, there was definitely a lot of balancing acts to pull off. You know, she was risky from the outset. We knew it going into it, but everyone kind of the entire team really brought their A game. I really appreciate a lot of the approaches design had for problem solving a lot of the issues. You know, she was an overly large character. She had a really unusual travel form. We knew like a good example, like early on, like in the concepting phase, we knew like, okay, this character is going to be such a monster. She's not going to ride a mount. Like she will never ride a mount in the game. That has to matter. And I know design came back almost instantly with, well, you know, we can cook it to the gameplay kit like this, and you know, we'll give her an actual travel ability, and it'll be super important. And the cool thing was how much it flavored her like the final character, right? It's playing Yagaroth is just a distinctly unique experience. That's you know visually she's awesome. You feel like a monster. Art really brought their A game on all that stuff, but it really just works hand in hand with the design. I mean, that's the mark of a really great champion, in my opinion. I mean,
Yeah,
it's you know, I think everyone's opinion.
yeah. On
Yeah,
that
I hope
note
so.
of, sorry,
Sorry, Brett, go
go
ahead.
ahead, Kevin. No,
I was
you
just gonna
you
say,
go.
okay, I'll go. Part of my personal philosophy when it comes to design is there are certain things that I do strongly feel need to be. For instance, the quick swap between forms, I think is almost strictly necessary from a gameplay perspective. But for the majority of things, I will never be the guy who stomps on other teams and says like this needs to happen. I don't care how you get it done, just do it. You know what I mean? So I'm very much um, love working with, to Thunderbrush's point, that back and forth with different teams, and hey, this is what we think we can do. Do you think that could work on your end? And specifically with the mount thing, we tried a couple different things, right? We tried or we thought about an idea where she gained a speed boost the first time, the first time out of spawn, as if she were on a mount until she was hit. But then we ran into, is that going to translate well? Can we show that? And then we ultimately ended up landing on baking, the ability to have increased movement into her kit and having her be, relatively speedy at base as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, I know animation has a lot of those conversations with you, more just along the sides of like timing for abilities, like her transitions and things. Where like there's just a lot of really good back and forth that we love having, where it's like, okay, how do you picture it? What were you imagining speed wise for certain things? And then there's also how the animation teams picture it and what we think can work and what we can get away with. Like I know usually we'll come up with an idea on our end for what motion we want a character to have, and we'll see how it works based on the initial kit numbers and like we love having conversations with design and just being like, okay, well, can we shave off 0.2 seconds here? Or like, what's the quickest we can get this down to? And like what do we feel comfortable with? And those are always great conversations because it also helps really kind of push the animation side of things. Where like, yeah, like I like this idea. I think we can really push it to like half a second maybe. Like, yeah, we can make it work. These are easy to adjust, and those conversations are really great, and it really helps bring out the best of a character and just being able to accommodate every department. But I was going to say to Thunderbrush earlier about really making her feel like a monster. If we go to the next slide, the last big animation challenge was her ultimate. Which I mean, we at this point we've come down a really big line of improvement and exploration with ultimate abilities and how we can really make them feel cinematic like. We have Corvus ultimate where he flies up in the air and channels this big summoning energy and it feels awesome. We have Hora's ultimate where she just empowers herself and runs around and hunts people. And then we had Yagorath's ultimate. And in this aspect of, okay, how can we make this cinematic experience make you feel like a raid boss and really just absolutely feel like a monster.
Yeah.
I ended up doing this one, so I'm a little biased on this, but I had a lot of fun with this, and like I worked a lot with Kevin on this for like, okay, well, how does this work if you point blank someone that's right in front of you, or how does this work if you hit someone that's far away? I think early on we had like we had talks about what the victim's going to experience from that end, and like originally we had the character walking and it was like, okay, well, what if you grab someone up on a ledge or a Drogos that's flying, and they end up just airwalking to Yagorath, and so we ended up like switching to a different element where like the person could still shoot you but they were floating. On the right side we had like a previs of just like what the target's distance to you would be. We ended up like cutting, I think, a pre-fire animation to where she just kind of targets the person and starts a vortex that brings them to you. And the animation team really wanted to make this feel like a monstrous event. Like this was a raid boss moment where you're doing mechanics, your team's fighting to save you. We wanted both elements of the Yagorath as a player and the victim of the ultimate to feel like a very intense and overwhelming cinematic moment where like as Yagorath, yeah, you feel like this monster and you're going to eat someone, and it's something we haven't really done in the game yet with this cinematic element to the camera, but at the same time we need to keep it in constraints for 3P animations where if you do it in a low ceiling building, is that really going to mess up things? Or if you do it in a hallway, what's going to happen? But also, I think we ended up with a nice solution where if you're the victim of this ultimate, it feels very heart pounding and intense, where you get this adrenaline of like really needing to break free. And I know there's a lot of like, we've had a lot of playtest moments of like the victim's team really trying to break Yagorath's focus on this ultimate and break her. We do have a failed animation on this for like if you successfully break Yagorath's health pool and stop her ultimate. It's just these 5-10 seconds of intense raid boss mechanic feeling moments that happen in the middle of a first person shooter game, and it's something that we haven't really done before, and it's this intense moment of satisfaction for either the Yagorath that eats her target or the team that successfully stops Yagorath and halts her complete obliteration of probably the tank. But yeah, this was something that we had a lot of iteration on and a lot of back and forth to really put in a monstrous feel to Yagorath. And Myron, I think you said it earlier, but as soon as Thomas in the audio department put the sounds in for the ultimate, it made an absolute difference. You just feel like the Maw, you feel like the terror. It really adds a lot to this character, and I know I said earlier I'm a little biased on this, but this is a lot of fun to do. And
you could say it's probably the coolest ult in the game. It's fine. Just own it.
Yeah, I mean I'll work on that.
I mean, there's a good contrast to it here, actually, because she's about to devour Khan, right? But there's kind of a good point with that, in my opinion, where Khan's ult, please don't get angry with me, Kevin. I'm not saying it's similar, right? But there's a somewhat similar experience where he grabs you and you're kind of almost at his mercy. But Khan as a character, he always felt like a grappler, right? Like you get bodied by him and thrown over his shoulder and shot in the air, and his ult, he grabs you and fires you off wherever he wants. That's the thing with Yagorath, again, as a character. It's bringing that art and the kit together in a way that felt incredibly satisfying. This raid boss moment for me, it was always like, this is the horror movie moment in the kit. I'm such a sucker for B movies with monsters. If it's got a monster, I've seen it, I guarantee you. And when this kind of came together, like with the music from Thomas, it's even got these like high strings, and there's this moment of pause, and you're just like, oh, and you just know it's coming, like that death blow. Brett killed it, obviously, just fantastic. I think it just really encapsulates the overall experience, and it just looks dope as hell. Look at that. Look at that.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. And I know there were like also conversations of like coming off of Vora, who also had an execute as an ultimate, like that's just kind of be the thematic ultimates for the Maw characters is executing. I don't know if that's always going to be the case, but it was with Vora and then Yagorath. So how do we make two back-to-back executing ultimate champions feel different? And I feel like this version of executing someone does feel drastically different than like Vora's version of executing someone, or like even are there other execute champions. And I just know the past few weeks playtesting Yagorath, it always is like such a intense few seconds of everyone over voice chat like being real, like having their adrenaline pumping whenever a Yagorath ults someone, and you work as a team to try and break out the victim.
Oh, for sure.
I think Yagorath's ultimate is the first time I like getting hit by it almost as much as I like hitting other people by it, just because there is that like, oh gosh, someone help me please moment as I'm getting pulled in.
Because like you said, for some of the other mechanics, like there are parts that are just going to work really well, and there's parts that we're going to have to compromise on, and that is even the case for the victim, where like, yeah, there's some champions where if you get ulted by a Yagorath, you're probably going to be a little better off. Then there are other characters that you get ulted by Yagorath that really aren't gonna do very well and probably gonna need the help of their team. And
Rip Fernando.
like I and like I even think like that was like some feedback and decisions that came out of playtest was like, okay, well, characters like Bomb King, like what are you able to do? Are you able to detonate your bombs while you're being because like for the most part, characters are limited to just their in-hand fires while you're being eaten by Yagorath. But characters like Bomb King that require their alternate fire to really make use of their in-hands. Like how does stuff like that work? And conversations got brought up a lot. That was really awesome to hear or be a part of, discovering stuff like that.
There was a whole, I had to come up with a list essentially of devices that we should or shouldn't be able to use. And then it stretched to, well, okay, if we allow that, do we allow that kind of thing? And it became a whole conversation, but it became an insightful one because we want to curate this experience to be, something that is unique and in that way, right?
I think like at one point Tambo was talking about like a list of characters and like their DPS numbers for like, all right, if you had full ammo and you got ulted by Yagorath at X range, like who can break out on their own and how well does people do? And like that just felt like an MMO min-maxing raid statistic thing that was like, we're an FPS game. Like this is definitely something different and new to introduce to players, and it's been awesome to experience. Like I know I've been showing up to playtest a lot lately, and just to get that exposure to what design and QA and prog kind of assess things like that is awesome to kind of be a part of.
And kind of speaking to that, we can, as we move on to the next slide, Thunderbrush, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well, but we can start going into a little bit of like the different challenges from a design and programming side as well as the art side. All right, I heard a name take a breath. I thought you might have had something else to add there.
Oh, sorry.
No worries at all.
I'm
So yeah, so
I'm
as we
along
go
for
into
the
the
ride.
no worries. As we go into the kind of programming and design side, if we go on the next slide, so I've been harping on about how this is the champion of exceptions, and it may not be your can of worms, so to speak. I'm really proud of that one, so I'll use it twice in the same presentation. But this is a champion of challenges, but also a champion of opportunities, right? So as Thunderbrush mentioned earlier, surprisingly, a lot of her base kit, or at least the general ideas, we did come up with in the initial brainstorming session with the larger team. And I was really proud of our team for doing that. We had some really cool ideas, and some changed as we implemented them. Right, as Brett was talking about earlier, that donut shape that we originally dictated as being like a necessary part of the gameplay element, not only from the level design side, but also from the gameplay side, was she was originally going to not be able to have be head shots, but instead she would have crit points, glowing crit points. I think it was reminiscent. If you ever played, I think it was Lost Planet, these glowing orange crit points that you could hit, and that was how she was going to be able to be taken down, is by focusing those crit points. That ended up not working out, obviously, so we ended up shifting to something else. But that's just an example of one of the opportunities that we had. We needed to make sure that she's fun to play as a champion and fun to play against. Can we fit a champion that can't move in one of her forms into Paladins, when mobility in general, but especially in Paladins, is so important? Can we make her feel like a natural part of Paladins, of the roster? Can she show up in a match and have it be like, all right, cool, I feel like we're still playing a game of Paladins? What is her identity within the realm? Can we provide a fun gameplay loop? We'll talk a little bit about kind of the mini raid boss feeling during her ultimate. That was something that we wanted to develop. We worked a little bit, as Brett mentioned earlier, the idea of connecting thematically with the other Maw champion at this point, Vora. Right, we both have those executes. It's kind of a theme of the Maw kit. Can we do that in a way that does feel different, which I think thankfully we did manage, and still is interesting. And I included this is an Adonis special, top right, an image of our very first iteration of Yagorath's ultimate. Beautifully drawn, but it illustrates the general idea, right? We have giant worms eat, sucking somebody in to end their life. And then bottom left is kind of just a gif of one of her abilities while in planted form, which increases her defensiveness in place, which allows her to just be a little bit tanky for a little bit longer. So Myron, I'd love to hear, kind of as we start off, some of the challenges and opportunities that you were facing, and then I'd love to talk a little bit about what I was thinking, like as far as coming up with a way to tie her kit together.
Yeah. So I guess I'll start with the in-hand and the spray. So originally we had the Needler as the in-hand, but through iteration and testing, we found out that the acid spray felt better as the in-hand, and then we moved the Needler to the offhand. And then through more testing and iteration, we're like, I really wish we could tie these two abilities together versus them feeling just standalone-ish. So they'll work as like a combination. So you'll feel like, oh, I want to hit them with this, and then I want to follow up with another ability. So we made it so if you have the needle ability and they're affected by like an acid spray, it leaves a pool in the ground, and the needler will ignite the pool of acid. So the enemies will take an additional damage when you combo them together. So we wanted to make this gameplay loop of having them two flow together well, versus them just, oh, sometimes if they're close, I want to spray, or if they're far away, I just want to use my needle ability.
Mm-hmm. And I think, part of that was that idea of, for me at least, the like melting armor or melting their defenses. We didn't want it to be too impactful, because it becomes very frustrating to suddenly take a large amount of damage, but it gives you a reason to combo your in-hand and your offhand, and it kind of plays into that theme of, like, if you're close to me, I'm going to, like, I'm a big, angry, scary worm. You don't want to be close to me, because not only am I doing damage to you, I'm also increasing the damage you take from other sources as well.
Mm-hmm. And then also, like, finding a balance between wanting to play in travel form and planted form. So essentially, she's almost like two champions, because she has so many abilities and each form is so different from the other. and how do we find a balance where you want to play between both and have them work in harmony, versus I just want to plant here and I don't ever want to move. So like knowing when to use your planted form abilities, versus like, oh, I'm taking too much damage right now, I need to move away or I need to reposition, and then transitioning into ball form, and going from there. It's definitely been a process to work through.
Yeah, I know Brett mentioned earlier the idea of, in early iterations, she was very potent in her movement form. So it was legitimately probably more fun at that point to never plant and to only roll around, knocking around the enemy team like pinballs and just hit and run. And of course she was silent at that time. So you don't even hear it. You just get slammed in the back by a giant rolling worm and then she's gone, but you took damage and you're knocked up and CC'd. And so, yeah.
I think on those first few playtests, I was going Nimble 3 immediately on a character that was not intended to be moving, which, yeah, the travel form was a lot of fun.
Perfectly
Still is,
balanced.
but it was powerful early on.
So part of what I ended up doing was iterating on those kinds of things. I know specifically for the movement form, like I said before, she has something that can increase her movement form, and that saw a lot of change because initially it was very strong. She went very fast, but we wanted to make it a natural curve, movement, a gameplay movement speed curve that provided a burst of speed, but then smoothed out to something more natural as it came back down to normal movement speed. And it was actually really interesting working with the different types of movement. Originally she was restricted from moving left or right, dissimilarly or unlike the way that we do our mounts right now, where you can kind of just strafe left and right. She was restricted forward and then could kind of lean left and right as she went forward. We found that made it really tough, especially when trying to maneuver in close spaces or in corners. You'd kind of run your face into a wall when you meant to turn around. So changing her turn radius, changing all that stuff to get the movement as close to possible as feeling good was a challenge, but it was a fun one.
Yeah. And then going back to the in-hand, I know we mentioned the 1P view earlier, but getting the acid to feel spraying from your mouth in 1P view and getting it to land in the proper location. Huge props to Rollin, our VFX guy, for getting that spray to look and feel like it's actually aiming in the right direction. And then we had to play with the camera angle, the height of where you're looking as Yago, and a bunch of iteration between there to make it feel like the acid is smoothly transitioning as you're spraying across.
Especially since the eyes are in the mouth, which is also where the acid is coming from, making it so that it seems to actually go where it actually goes while also maintaining visibility was something that was pretty tough. And then I'll talk about one more fun thing before we move on to the next slide here. But the biggest thing for me was at some point, which is often the case, due to the nature of iteration, at some point something was missing. It just like something didn't tie stuff together, and I think personally that the ultimate ended up being the puzzle piece that I didn't have initially, and it was a lot of changes to be made initially, a lot of different numbers changes, a lot of even functional changes, but the idea of creating a little mini raid encounter or a mini boss feeling where you can plant and I am a threat, and if you pass the DPS check, I will no longer be a threat, but I will get some of my I'll be a threat soon. I'm going to be a threat soon. So you always constantly have to be on the alert for this kind of looping mechanic, which I think adds a lot to her presence, like her personally, but also her presence on the field. I don't know if you guys agree with that general idea, at least.
Yep, definitely.
I go
Absolutely.
Boost 3 on Yagorath.
Probably, yeah, as often as possible. But Myron, if you go to the next slide, I'd love to hear a little bit about the specific challenges we had with moving her, because I think that was one of the most difficult, if I remember correctly.
Yep. So when we were first, when I was first coming up, with how I wanted to implement this champion from a programming standpoint. We knew that the movement ability would be the pivotal point of this champion, one of the most important parts of making this champion feel fun to play. And we wanted to make sure that worked first. So when going through it, we're like, how do we make the worm feel like a wheel? And as she's moving through the world, what obstacles are we going to face? We can't go with the normal champion movement that we use for all of our other characters. So first off, we were deciding between, how do we want her to always move towards the camera? Do we want her to be forced rotation, where you're looking, and the player, always has to move forward? So that was our initial approach. We made it so, when you move your mouse and you turn the camera, you would follow along that trajectory. But after some testing around, play tests, we felt like it felt a little weird that the player couldn't, omnidirectional move as a wheel. So we changed it up and we ripped that out. And we're like, okay, Larry, let's go freeform movement. You can just move any direction you want, regardless of what direction your camera is facing. And then after we decided that, we had to go and figure out, the acceleration, deceleration. How would you feel if you, wanted to make a turn or ran into a wall, for example? As Kevin mentioned earlier, there's gameplay curves hooked up to Yagorath. So she has a few different curves. She has an acceleration curve. She has a passive deceleration and an active deceleration curve. So if you let go of the movement directional keys, you'll just passively decelerate. And then if you hold the back direction of the direction you're previously moving at, you'll brake. So you decelerate much quicker. And then we had to find a balance between that to make sure that she's, accelerating at a good pace and decelerating at a good pace. So as soon as you activate your travel form, we don't want her to ripping off into space, moving too quickly. So we have to transitionally move that curve up and find a good balance between there. And then when you're turning, if it would feel weird if you flew in the other direction straight back. So we added a little drift to her, so she actually has to make the turn and go all the way around if you want to change directions. And another cool thing about Yago is she has an ability in her travel form directly tied to her movement. She has a charge ability, so she'll speed up instantly or over a very short amount of time when you activate it. So you can actually go into travel form and then activate this burst of movement speed. And that was also another challenge we had to come across because, how do we get this fast-paced movement ability that activates so quickly to, transition into it from your normal travel form? And that was a separate thing we had to tackle, and making sure that, do we just follow along the initial trajectory you were going? Are we going to change your direction? And I think we found a good solution to that, where you would activate the charge and you're just going to continue along the direction you're going and activate at a burst of speed. And then you'll transition back into your normal speed as the charge is ending.
Yeah, I was always super happy because whenever I came to you with something stupid or different or anything, you'd be like, yeah, I know how we can do that. Let's try it out. And so we were able to do a bunch of different things or make those changes in a short time frame. But yeah, just the things that we've been able to do with Yagorath, I think I'm super excited for people to get their hands on her. And as we end up wrapping up here, I will make a brief mention as we go to the next slide. I know some of you are lore buffs, and this is not a lore panel, but I will say that stay tuned. I think it's safe to say that she is the greatest threat to the realm that we have seen so far. So we hope to really be able to tie in Yagorath and Vora to this larger story that we're trying to tell, especially over the course of the next year. So if you are a lore buff, stay tuned. So we are just about wrapping up here. So I would love to hear. Firstly, I'm going to say thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for joining us. It's my pleasure. It's our pleasure to be here on this panel. And then I'll open up the floor to the rest of my panel compatriots for any other closing remarks. But thank you guys again.
Yeah, the Yagorath's been a long time coming, a champion that we've been excited for a very long time now, and at least in the animation department, it was this running joke of oh, when are we gonna get to the worm? When are we gonna get to the worm? And then we finally started working on the worm, and we're like, it's worm time, and we've been excited for her for a long time now, and it's a little surreal knowing that she's finally announced and going to be in the game finally. really hope everyone enjoys playing her. A lot of love and work went into making her complete.
Yeah, just to really follow up what everyone else is saying, she's been a long time coming. The team has been incredibly excited. She's she ticks all the right boxes. We were beyond stoked to really just even unveil that this champion was coming out. Gosh, I mean, I think the first iteration of her concept was maybe over a year ago, even. She had juggled around the schedule a little bit, to be fair. Just to be clear, we have done other things in the meantime, obviously. But she's been in the oven, so to speak, for a long time, which has definitely helped fuel, I think, a lot of our excitement internally. Kevin gave us a great character kit design to play off of. Animation obviously slayed it. Roland brought his A game on all the VFX work. The slime is fantastic. I know Myron, for instance, went through just endless amounts of feedback from the team on the movement form. I feel almost every champion stand up we had, it was always some kind of small amount of feedback of like, well, when you turn this way, it doesn't feel quite right yet. And we just kept going back and polish. And yeah, again, I know it's such a cheesy, generic thing to say, but just really proud of all the work the team's done. It's just incredibly excited for everyone to get their hands on playing Yagorath.
Mm-hmm. Yep, she's been a lot of fun to work on. A lot of people putting a lot of effort and time into her, and I'm looking forward to what people think.
And with that, we will wrap up Yagorath, the making of the Maw. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and we will catch you next time.
Thank you, guys.